Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. A couple things of housekeeping before we get into this one. The first is, as some of you know, I tested positive for COVID about a week and a half ago. Don't know how I got it. I've been training pretty hard for the X-Helps and have been spending some time in the gym, so that's one maybe likely spot. But I have been very fastidious about washing my hands and wearing a mask from the beginning, back from March with this whole thing. So point here is just to stay vigilant. I got it a few days before the president did, and you've all seen the fallout from that. I think more than 30 people in that Rose Garden deal that they had have tested positive, which in one day was more than Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, Taiwan, and South Korea combined. So they say more than 90% of the U.S. has still not been exposed, and I can tell you this thing is it's no joke. And you also have to go through the kind of the emotional side. It's pretty scary. It's you feel kind of like an outcast. There's the shame side of it, and I'm obviously pretty healthy, training pretty hard for the X-Alps, and it took my feet out from under me for sure. So be careful. Be fastidious. I think we're in for a long haul here. Doesn't seem like there's any miracle around the corner, and certainly be much better to not get it if you can. So be careful, everybody. The second bit of housekeeping is, I know you don't come to this show for politics, but it's my show. Say what I want. And we've got a big election coming up. I know many of you listening are not Americans. You won't be voting in this election, but this election is a big one for this country and for the world. And there is certainly a lot on the ballot, and I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but there's a lot coming down to the wire on this one. And we've just had 4 pretty chaotic years. And if you're not too excited about the status quo and you're worried about things like biodiversity and nature and climate change and education and morality and racial justice, income inequality, the American dream, snow, and I don't think it's too much to say even our future is on the ballot this year, not just for the president, but for all the down ballot races that are very, very important. So please make a plan to vote. They say if you have a plan, you're 20% more likely to vote. It's less than a month away. Voting is already happening in many parts of the country, early voting. And if you need some help with registration or just make sure you're registered, there's also, there's a lot of voter rolls and suppression and all kinds of stuff going on to keep people from voting. So make sure you're eligible and you're registered. Go to patagonia.com/elections for all kinds of resources on that, and make a plan, either through absentee or on the day or drop off ballots, mail in, make a plan and make it happen. A lot of people have died here and around the world for the right to vote. It is our civic duty. We got to do it. That's how our representatives listen. And please, this year, please vote. Beg your grandma. Beg the kids that don't think it matters. Get your friends to go. Get a big party to go. Wear your masks and go vote. And I'll leave you with this quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson before you go to the polls. He said, "The greatest thing about science is it's true whether you believe in it or not." So science is also on the ballot this year. Let's go to the polls and vote. Thank you. This conversation is with Steve Ham, a British pilot who's been in the game since the very, very beginning and was a real passionate hang glider, had a bunch of accidents, and transitioned into paragliding, has run and been a meet director and been involved in more than 60 competitions, including really big comps like the Worlds and the Europeans and a bunch of World Cups. He was really the person who put Piedrahita in Spain on the competition map, and has over the years been on the British team a number of times, has held a number of records both in the UK and in Spain, and just fascinating. Most of you probably know him more recently by his incredible illustrations. He had a pretty bad accident after the really famous 2011 comp in Piedrahita with all the tragedy, which we go into in depth in this conversation. But he had his own personal accident after that really screwed up his arm, and still has pretty limited mobility and movement in that arm, and became an illustrator after that. That was something he could do with that arm. So you know him for his amazing illustrations. He illustrated all of Kiwi's great articles about his road to Macedonia and his world's attempt that he did in Cross Country magazine. And then he illustrated my coronavirus column back in XC Mag this spring, which was really fun. And he did one of the Alaska expedition as well. So he's done a bunch of stuff for me, and we've never met. So I really wanted to get him on the show and talk about Piedrahita, what happened there. That the writing was, for many people, was really on the wall. This was right after the invention of the two-liners, and this was when the R11 came out, and Jen had a similar two-liner wing, and a lot of pilots pretty excited about flying it, but didn't have the skills to do so. So that Worlds event, day 2 in Piedrahita, went really pear-shaped, and 2 fatal accidents and several other reserves. And the fallout from that really changed paragliding as we know it. That ended the open class, instigated the CCC class. There was all kinds of interesting things that happened with the serial class after that. And so, yeah, a lot of fallout, a lot of changes. That was Steve's the last competition that he ran. He has been a meet director since. But anyway, some great stories. It takes us a while to warm up in this one, but near the end, he talks about a bunch of great stories. So please stick with it to the end, and some great history here and great advice. And I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too. Cheers. Steve, I've been really excited to have you on the show. Ed reached out months and months ago after you did the awesome illustrations for the coronavirus article that I did for the magazine for my column. And I'm very protective of my Australia PWC helmet bag that's got your awesome illustrations all over it. I'd love to meet you in person someday. You've been at this for an awfully long time. I actually didn't know how long until you sent me that great email yesterday with a bunch of your history with hang gliding. You've been at this from the very beginning, and I really want to get into all that. But I thought we might, a very interesting point in your history and in the history of the sport might be to ping off right with Piedrahita in 2011. You were the meet director there at that Worlds that was so tragic and really changed the dynamic of the sport. And there was a lot of fallout from that. And I just thought to rope people in, obviously the pilots that listen to the show that have been at this game for an awful long time remember indelibly the 2011 event, but many of the people that are new to the sport, maybe not so much. So let's start with 2011, your role there. And as we talked about a little bit before we started recording here, many of you thought the writing was on the wall there before that even started.
Yes, we did. Well, we all suspected there might be a possible problem because running up in the spring before the event, the event was in July, which is the sort of peak of the conditions here in Piedrahita. People had been starting flying the new gliders. And the year before, the I-10 had been out and been very successful. But during that spring, some of the newer gliders were coming out. And of course, the CIBL had changed the ruling on gliders for open class. And most of the gliders, which had been flown the previous season, the 3-liners, were no longer certified under the new rules. So we had the situation where many pilots, although they were happy on their previous year's 3-liner comp glider, they couldn't actually fly them because the manufacturer didn't want to spend the money to do the tests once again, because of course many of them had new gliders out and they wanted to sell the new gliders. So a lot of pilots would come to the event with new gliders which hadn't been flown much, although the new rule was they had to have them at least 30 days before the competition happened. But, what with the possible bad weather, and a lot of pilots turned up with very little airtime. And we also started hearing stories of people saying these gliders are just fantastic. They're just really you can't deflate them, but when they go, they go. And then the energy was so vast, and people couldn't deal with what was happening to them. So everyone was just, even with minor deflations, people were throwing their reserves. So we started to get a lot of reserves being thrown in the early part of the season. And even some big names, Alex Hoffer, who was the European champion back in the early 2000s, where he had an accident, broke his back. And, other important people, not just, people sort of mid-ranking pilots, but the good pilots. So there was a lot of concern really coming in. And when all the pilots turned up, I was obviously concerned. I spoke to Russell Ogden, who's a good friend for many years. And of course, he works with Ozone and very knowledgeable on all these aspects and had been involved in testing the gliders. And I did ask him, could you please perhaps do a briefing on the first day in front of all the pilots, the obligatory safety briefing that we were to do, to tell them how to actually fly these gliders and, more importantly, how to recover them. And of course, Russell being what he is, he was very, well, I don't want to teach, it's like teaching granny to suck eggs. It's not, these are all good pilots, they should know, but, I'll tell them anyway. And of course, he stood up and went through this, lots of hand gestures, this, that, and the other. And, I was not looking at him, I was looking at the pilots, and a lot of them had, they were agog, really, what? We have to do that? What's a back flying? What's all this? What's all the other? And, the story was the gliders only needed a load test, and they needed a video of the test pilot recovering from those events. But of course, it didn't always have to recover. We just had to have the video of recovering on 3 or 4 occasions, apparently. And I asked Russell, what are we going to do? And he said, well, we're hoping for the best, hoping for the best. So we went into this event hoping for the best for all the pilots. But it was a pretty scary scenario.
And are the majority of Steve, are the majority of the pilots, was this the R10?
No, this is the R11. The R10 had been out the year before. So this is the R11, and of course Gin and a number of other manufacturers. They also had their versions of two-liners. But the key gliders with the boomerang and the R11. And on the first day we had no incidents. So Piedrahita is recognised for its convergence flying. So you get very strong convergence lines over flatlands, and you can do huge tasks here quite easily. And the first day was an excellent day. We had a repeat of a task we did way back in 1995 at one of the early PWCs we did here. And that was like a world. At that time, back in 95, gliders just didn't fly very far. They were sort of very much sort of fishbowl tasks in the PWC. When I announced this task of 175 kilometer goal task, people said, "Yeah, it's impossible." I remember Richard Gallon coming up to me saying, "You're crazy. It's impossible." And for Richard it was, because he bombed out on the way. But we actually got, I think, about 60, 70 of the pilots, a good part of the field, to the goal. Nice. And some other curious things that connected with that. But moving on back to the other this task, successful tasks, no problems. Everyone got there. There was huge repercussions though the next morning, because on that in Piedrahita, for the first 65 k's you can fly as high as you like, and it was a day with perhaps 3,500, 4,000 meters, and unfortunately after 65 kilometers, then the airspace limit drops down to 3,000 meters for the majority of the second part of the flight. And although after Russell did his talk, I did a very long explanation of the airspace, with audio visuals, a lot of people bust the airspace. And so that was a big discussion on the next morning. In fact, I think of those 60 people who made gold. No, I think actually, no, 60 people made it in 1995. But I think it was 120 out of the field of 150 made the gold. And then I think about 25 or 30 of those, we had to count them. And so I think I was rung up at 3 o'clock in the morning by the Mexican team saying, "Que pasa? Que pasa?" Because, of course, we deleted the points for the whole of the Mexican team, so they weren't very happy. But anyway, that was the problem, going into day 2. And then, of course, on day 2, we had to rein back. We had another fantastic, really nice forecast with high base, but we don't want to go into that airspace. So we did a relatively short task, just to Avenue, which is about 65 Ks with a little bit of flying around the valley beforehand. And on that task, that's when we had the 2 accidents. Now, it was the day with not strong winds, a day a little bit similar to the day before, but it was more of a blue day, perhaps a little bit stronger, a little bit more dry, a little more rough. But the sort of tasks, the sort of conditions that we have here throughout the summer, I'm usually guiding guys on B-class gliders, C-class gliders, and it's the sort of the milk run we do. A flight to Abilene, it's 55, 60 Ks, and it's no big deal. But of course, for people flying these gliders, which are a little bit twitchy, a little bit more tricky to control back in those days, then it became very problematic. Of course, we had the 2 fatal accidents with ITEL and Francisco. And also, just getting into goal, just trying to lose height over goal. We had 3 other people throw their chutes, just trying to lose height over goal. People were having, I don't know what extent of the deflation they had, but people were throwing their reserves quickly because they knew they wouldn't be able to get out of those problems. And then, of course, with the 2 fatalities, one of them, Francisco Vargas, it was before the Stargate, very benign conditions coming back from a pre-Stargate turn point. And I think there was a German pilot who flew through the same air almost just ahead of him, relatively smooth. Unfortunately, what happened with Francisco Vargas, he had an incident, and he ended up being in a full stall and trying to hold the stall, but at the last minute, I think from witnesses, the glider trying to recover from, he must have let up a little bit, and it sort of swung him into the air, and he was essentially killed straight away. We had a pilot landing near him, and he thought he was, he probably died at that moment. And the other incident, the other case was with ITEL from Chile, where he was actually probably on the final glide to goal alongside a friend of his. And I think they were at 2,800 meters just on a glide. And he took a hit. And of course, the glider went into a very, very quick spiral dive. And this later became the reason why we now have to carry 2 parachutes in Category 1 competitions, because it appeared that he got one arm trapped. So he couldn't, his throwing hand, so he wasn't able to access the chute. And then, so he spiraled down from 2,000 down to the ground, and probably killed instantly once again. And of course, with these 2 fatalities, well, then of course the whole panorama of Category 1 competitions changed, as you probably know, for many years. And of course, even though it was a world championship, we didn't actually have a lot of media going into the event. But of course, after the accidents, then we had just about every radio and TV company in Spain hovering around and trying to report on the event. And of course, after the CIVL, after a day or 2 of deliberation, they decided to cancel the rest of the competition. We had flown enough tasks for it to be validated, and then that was essentially a banning of the open class glider for a number of years until the competition class was sorted out.
What became the CCC class? That took a couple of years, didn't it? As I remember,
it took some time. Well, after this this tragic event, of course, it hit me emotionally in a terrible way, as it probably did Calvo, who's my safety director, and many people here. That was the end. For me, that was the end of running competitions. It was going to be my last event. We'd run perhaps sort of 60, 70 international events since the early 90s. And it was just too much really to comprehend. It just didn't seem worth going on, doing more events. As time went on, of course, time heals all, etc., etc. And but I really kind of moved away from following events and taking too much interest in what was happening as far as competition design and development went for a few years after that. So I don't know too much about all the ins and outs of the subsequent development of the CC competition class, but I do know there are a lot of people who really love their gliders, the R11, for example, and there are people that we had a Belgian pilot came out quite recently. He's still got his, which he bought another second-hand one when that wore out. So many people love those gliders, and of course, in the right hands, they were exceptional gliders. Maybe people will say they were almost possibly more performant than some of the gliders we have today. I don't know, because I don't fly modern competition gliders at the moment. But it certainly caused a lot of problems, internationally for the events. Everyone's had to then fly serial class, and then of course the serial class. We'd been through this whole serial class many years before in 1998, and unfortunately, it was very much reliving exactly the same scenario for me as 1998, which is it was the first Category 1 event that we organised here in Piedrahita. We'd had previously some very, very successful PwCs and national events. We've done the Swedish nationals and the Nordics, the British many times, Spanish nationals, of course. And we did these 3 PwCs. And the pilots, on discovering Piedrahita, the merits, especially the European pilots, because before about 1984, most of the PwC tasks were in Europe, and they were very much sort of fishbowl tasks, 40, 50 Ks, occasionally 60. And then here in 95, we were suddenly doing these huge tasks because we were able to, lines of convergence, and even with the gliders at the time, we did a 140K out and return with about 60 people in goal, this big 175K goal, and lots of other exciting things. And so we were sort of the flavor. Piedrahita was sort of on the map and popular, and we had a lot of people wanting to do the Europeans. So we did the Europeans, and unfortunately, it was time also when there was a lot of development and things were being pushed. I was listening to Kiwi's podcast the other day, and he was talking about this time as well, where gliders was beginning to get a little bit problematic and difficult to fly, and there were accidents in many comms, and then once again we had our first Category 1 competition, and it was just at this cusp of when gliders were becoming very, very problematic, and then we had a fatal accident at our event as well. It was actually mid-air soon after launch. So probably you couldn't really say, was it anything to do with the gliders? I don't think so, actually, because actually the accident that day was instigated by a pilot flying what would have been the DH-323 back in those days, which would have been like a C-class glider. And he fell on top of another glider, and they both went down to the deck. So it wasn't really the fact that it was dangerous gliders, but it was on top of all the other accidents and competitions at that time, which then brought about the possibility of the serial class. And there was a lot of argument from, especially Robbie Whittle was very much as the messiah, trying to push this forward. And in some countries, such as Great Britain, they went sort of unilaterally and decided we're going to fly serial class only in our nationals. And a number of countries did that, but a number of countries didn't, which then gave some imparity, really. If you're going to world's events and some people are flying serial and some people are flying open class, well, you kind of imagine who's going to win. So the serial class, although it struggled along for quite a few years, and it became this, and it was successful in many ways because it did give people that option to take a slightly less risky route. And also, if we go back to the 90s and maybe even the early and the 2000s, there were some really nice open class gliders, the real hot ships, the ones that ran really, really well, but you couldn't get your hands on them because they were reserved for the factory pilots. So this also caused a certain amount of resentment that people couldn't get these good gliders. But that was another can of worms back in the 90s. Of course, then moving back to 2011, when we've got the same problem, but this time the CIVL took definitive action and said that's enough, and zero class only. But of course, the zero class gliders soon came to resemble very much the open class gliders in a few years.
Right, sure. And I remember the fallout from that. With a lot of the kind of lighter pilots. I'm thinking about like Tom Paine and I remember Mad Syndergaard. There were a lot of pilots that was kind of it. The Piedrahita was it when they banned the open class. A lot of the pilots that are lighter, which of course makes me really feel for the typically the women pilots who are really light, they just didn't feel like they could compete anymore because they didn't have that open class possibility, and it was very discouraging. I know for many. I think it feels like that's kind of come around now, and it's not so much as big of an issue. I mean, the weight thing has always been an issue, but it must have just been emotionally, not just from the tragedy of the two deaths, obviously, but just everything else. It must have just been quite a soup that you were in.
Yes, it certainly was. I mean, well, going back to the weight thing, there's an anecdote on the first day of the Worlds here. That we only had one Chinese pilot that year, and it was a girl. I can't remember her name now, unfortunately. And she was very lightweight, probably about 40, 45 kilos. And most teams would come with assistants, which they had to pay for. And most teams would come with one or two assistants. I believe the Chinese had 4 assistants and 1 pilot. But it was this girl. She was carrying a huge amount of ballast. She was flying an R11. And Carver, who was my safety director, he's very. The rules are the rules. And he had a weighing machine at takeoff. He did a lot of hammock, very professional sort of weighing machine, and he liked to weigh people. And this girl, obviously walking out to takeoff with being carried by 4 strong Chinese assistants, kind of caught his eye. So for safety, inverted commas, he took her weighed her, and he said we can't carry all that ballast. So he took the ballast off her, and of course that made her completely unsafe. So and she subsequently took off and flew out, had a deflation through a reserve, and we later had to recover her from a tree. So some of these rules which are implicated because it is true, if you are carrying a lot of weight when you crash, then it can be a problem. But of course, with those particular gliders, they needed to be weighted up, obviously, to be safe. So there was a lot of anachronisms really on the whole safety thing, and hopefully things are better now.
Yeah, I mean and again it's this. It's when you look at the range, when you have a big, heavy, strong guy that's carrying the max, he's up at the 32 versus, like the Chinese girl that you're talking about. I mean, it's just, you're for one person, that's quite a bit of weight. For another person, it's you're more than double potentially. And it becomes really challenging for takeoff and landing. And obviously for landing, after you've just flown a comp and, you're tired, and it can be real risky. I can't remember if that was a contributing factor in Seiko's accident. I think when she broke both of her ankles, that might not. I can't remember if that was an acro thing or if that was just from her being totally loaded up. I'd have to reach out and find out. But I mean, I know that, just from my own personal experience, like in Alaska, carrying all that weight is. It's tough when you land, or it's tough if you don't have the right kind of wind.
Yeah. But if you want to fly those gliders, then I guess you have to weight up. It's for me, it was always the having to carry the weight up the mountain rather than you can always dump it before you land, I guess, can't you? But yeah, I mean, it's one of these eternal questions. I think Brett Janaway, he's come up with this new format for a competition, of which I cannot tell you the whole details, although they explained it to me quite well earlier this year. And actually, it's been interesting. The weightless competition, that's what he calls it.
I think Bruce Goldsmith too.
An event
they're doing some really cool stuff with that.
Yeah. So, because it's always been a bit of a bugbear with Bruce as well, because Bruce probably weighs around 65, 70 kilos, and his observation was, it was all the big butch guys who are winning, especially in the early days. And I think it became less important. In the early 90s, people were sort of flying huge gliders, like 32 square meters, carrying vast amount of water, just because it gave them a big edge. Mm. And Bruce was obviously aware of that, and as we all are. And maybe Brett Janaway's, I think he's trying to get some form of approval from the CIVR. So who knows? And maybe it's a good direction to go.
And was your decision to stop running comps literally because of what happened in 2011, or was it just it was probably going to happen anyway after running 60 something comps?
Well, I kind of eased off a little bit some years before. The reason we ran the Worlds in 2011 was really to save the site here, because if you're not right, we have a problem here which goes back a couple of hundred years. Curiously enough, I'll explain why. But basically, the site at Piedrahita, although it's directly above Piedrahita, doesn't actually belong to Piedrahita, because about 200 years ago, the Duke of Alba, who was a local aristocrat, he was building a palace here. And obviously he couldn't squeeze enough taxes out of the local serfs. And he went to a nearby village and to get some money for building supplies. And in return, he said, well, you can have as much of the mountain as you can gather by riding, with a flock of, with a bunch of goats. So Clippity-Clop, this other guy from the nearby town, he took away most of the mountain, including the takeoff. So Piedrahita now doesn't own the mountain. This nearby small village does. So when we started out all these events back in the early 90s, the problem we had, although Piedrahita were very, very keen, the town hall, for us to run events, it didn't actually belong to them, the takeoff. Of course, we were landing in Piedrahita, and all the infrastructure was in Piedrahita, but this small village of about 40 inhabitants, they were the ones who owned the takeoff. And they wanted some benefit from us using their site. So we had there's all sorts of things going on, and eventually the provincial government stepped in, and they built a bar at takeoff, and they reconditioned the takeoff to a certain amount, so this village could profit from it. However, that wasn't enough for them. And I remember on the very first day of the first PWC in 1994, on the practice day actually, they came up to takeoff, and they put a barbed wire right across the middle of the takeoff, leaving us about 10 meters for a takeoff run in front of the barbed wire. What's going on? You're crazy. And of course, we had all these international pilots turning up saying, well, these guys are trying to kill us, putting barbed wire all over the takeoff. And anyway, further negotiation, and with the politicos, with the politicians, and it was sorted out to a certain extent. But but by running events each year, then of course the town hall were quite happy, seeing the tourism coming in. But then as we eased off a little bit after about 2000, we had a big problem. That's right. In year 2000, they wanted to put aerogenerators, electricity windmills across the takeoff, and obviously we didn't want that because it wasn't going to be very good for paragliding. The town didn't want it because it's not very nice for any form of tourism. But of course, this little village, they were out to make a lot of money from this. So they suddenly became very, very ecologically aware and wanted their clean energy and the 30,000 euros per year for each windmill. And so there was a bit of fight. We had a big struggle and demonstrations, marches, roadblocks, and eventually it kind of won out, and we didn't have the windmills installed. But for many years, we weren't allowed to fly. We would, although we had supposedly had the legal right of flying at the takeoff, the owners could go to the police station and say, look, they're on our land. So they barbed it up. So we were actually going in, taking off over this new barbed wire they then put up. And for many years, the whole thing went into a bit of a collapse, Piedrahita. And to get the things going back again, to get the town hall and the provincial government on our side, well, what's better than the World Championships? So in we went to, and we bid for the World Championships. And we got it. And of course, that allowed huge infrastructure. We now got 3,000 square meters of astroturf. The bar was rebuilt. And so the positive aspect of the World Championship was the fact that we've now got a fantastic takeoff and a great infrastructure. The last World Championships I did with the British team was in Manila in Australia
one Bruce
in
won.
2007.
Yeah.
Bruce won, though, and yes, he did. And I thought, well, I might do quite well there because I won a couple of events before in Manila, Godfrey Wennis's Open events and the New Zealand Nationals I won there as well. And so I thought, well, if I'm ever going to do anything good, it's going to be here in Manila, this Worlds, because I'd been to other Worlds and I didn't do particularly well, to be honest. And it was going okay. Unfortunately, well, was it going okay? Not really, because we had pretty poor weather, as often happens. Manila's a fantastic venue. And then along came the World Championships, and poor Godfrey, poor us. We all had this really suboptimal bad weather. Lots of clouds, storms. The week before, we had the experience with Eva Wisniewska. If you remember, the girl who went up into the QNIM to 10,000 meters. Because I was there, I was actually just underneath there, and that's another story. That was just crazy day. It was an open distance competition, which Godfrey was running the week before. And I took off, and I was top of the stack, first to leave, and I went off because there was a big congestus cloud forming downwind. I thought, oh, no thanks, or go crosswind. And it was open distance, you could go any direction you wanted to. But I thought, well, no one's going to go towards that big congestus cloud because that'd be crazy. So they're going to follow me. And I confidently look back, and everybody went the other way, directly to this thing, this big cloud. But
competition.
And I kept on off on my other route, but of course it was a bad route. I ended up getting low, and by the time I got back up again, I drifted on downwind, and I was kind of going in the same direction as everyone else. Meanwhile, there's another big congestion cloud about 20 kilometers further to the right of track, and I was kind of speeding up and noticing it was getting a little bit lifty, and then these two cumuluses, very large cumuluses, Tara cumulus, were beginning to coalesce. And there were still gaps, and I was just flying straight through. Lots of people were still climbing, and I kind of got to the edge just before the sort of clunk, the door shut behind me, and it was just solid cloud. And I'm not a particularly brave person anymore, and I just kept on pushing, got beyond that, and looking back, you could see the shelf of the QNIM, and there were people, they were just climbing underneath it. And there was only about 3 people ahead of me, I think. Everyone was trying to get high. I didn't worry about the height. I think David Dagao was ahead, and 2 or 3 others. But as I was pushing into the blue, as it got lower, I could feel the wind was changing. It was all being hoovered back into the QNIM, so I didn't take any climb because it would have just drifted back into the cloud. I landed very, very quickly, but by the time I was packed up, it was pissing down with rain, and it had gone crazy. And of course, there's lots of stories that day. And I went to find some shelter. And then when the rain eased off, a car pulled up. It was his German team leader, Stefan Mascht. And the last coordinates he had was above that shack, pretty much where I was watching those people rather foolishly take a climb into the QNIM. And, so there I was that day. And then the week after Manila, so going back to my last competition, I thought I might do quite well. But unfortunately, it was pretty shit weather, and which wouldn't have been so bad because I'm British, kind of used to bad weather and mincing around. But I was flying Bruce's new FR4, I think it was called. And this is a real banana. It was a 1 in 8 aspect ratio glider. It was a 3-liner, and it didn't have any possibility of big earring, or I think you could beeline, but Bruce said, maybe not. It's a little bit exciting. And then with the competition, with so many clouds around, you kind of couldn't control your height very well. So you'd have to sort of take big routes around clouds, or fly extraordinarily fast, and hopefully you'll descend before you go into cloud. So, well, I had some good days, some bad days. As a whole, the British team were doing okay. In fact, for the 3 days before the end of the event, we were on the podium as a team. We would have been on the podium, and Bruce was winning. And then we thought, oh, well, okay, I was sort of, I don't know, I was probably about 20th or something, not so bad, not so awful. And I might not have been that good, actually. I might have been worse than that, but I wasn't too embarrassingly bad. And we were going to be on the podium as a British team. I thought, hey ho! And it was bad weather, and it was looking like it was going to be bad weather. And we thought, great, may it rain for the last day, because and Bruce will win, and we'll win. And I think it's the worst possible thing you can do in the competition, to hope for bad weather, of course. Yes. So then the next day, of course, the it gets good, and you're all demotivated because you don't want to fly. And then we had to fly, and both, I think it was myself, Mark, and Russell, we all just had a bomb out. Woof. But Bruce, superstar, managed to get into goal, took the worlds, and the rest of us had a good old cry because we were no longer on the podium. But and we had really, really shitty results. So I thought, well, bloody hell, I am really shit. So I better stop doing this. Oh, I didn't. Actually, I think I did the pre-was in El Valle in 2009. But it was all sort of on the downhill slope for me then already. And then, of course, I got focused on trying to get this Worlds thing together. And I thought, well, that's going to be my swan song as far as, I wanted to go out with a fantastic, exceptional event. It was going to be flyable every day, big epic tasks and everything you want in a competition. And I was going to be, lauded as a superstar and a master meter actor. And, of course, it didn't turn out to be anything like that at all. It turned out to be, a tragic nightmare, and it turned out to be what it was, which we've already discussed. I was in a pretty bad way that year, and then I had a really bad accident myself, personal accident. Just nothing spectacular. All the really bad accidents. Just stupid things. I managed to mash myself up really badly and shattered my right arm, and that left me in pain for 5 years. Pretty bad pain. And I lost the use of my arm pretty much. It's still locked in. I haven't got much movement on it, but for many years, I was able to fly. But I went back to flying low B-class gliders, and I couldn't really consider flying a competition then on. And then I kind of fell out of the habit, and I actually began to realize how liberating not flying competitions is. Because, of course, when you fly a competition, you're pretty angry most of the time because unless you win, it's a pretty annoying experience sometimes because there's a lot of pressure, and if you don't do well, you get pretty pissed off. And as a meet director running competitions, also you've got 150 people who are on there all pretty pissed off a lot of the time as well because there's only one guy who wins at the end of the competition, so. It was, in a way, liberating for a few years. But then, of course, the town hall here, okay, hey, what's going on? We need competitions. And luckily, other people kind of stepped up. Actually, Lodi, the chap who was the other organizer of the Worlds, he wanted to carry on running Spanish events and things. So, although I wasn't meet director, I started doing the meteor briefing, and then I got roped into doing helping on the task, and became pretty much the meet director for a number of events here. But I was always a little bit reluctant, shall we say? And but then a few years ago, I was rung up by some nice people in Colombia and asked me to help out with an event in Rodanillo. So I went there, and that was a different experience. It was more of a fun event, and most of the people were happy most of the time, which was refreshing. And
it's such a consistent place, isn't it? I mean, I think people are happy when they get to fly every day, and that's the nice thing about Rodanillo is you just get pretty consistent weather.
Yeah, and also I think a lot of people go there not really for the event. These were open event, sort of fun event. And of course, there was the serious guys, and a lot of American guys, and on the whole, people were really nice and they were really good about it. And I thought, yeah, actually, I do kind of miss this, and I'll do this again if they ask me again. And they did this year, and I think one other time. So who knows? Who knows?
One of the problems we have with comps in the States is no one can figure out how to cover their costs, so they have to charge a lot of money to do it. And then that often affects people signing up because they're pretty expensive. And, we don't have the sponsors that help cover the retrieve costs or the gas costs or the vehicle costs or the personnel costs, that kind of thing. I mean, it's just, we've never really figured it out. Like, Miguel and his whole Alas del Hombre team has done in Valle, or it sounds like you've done in Piedrahita. Is that,
No. We haven't done this. That's been the big problem. We've never ever had a sponsor beyond. Well, actually, no. We've had to rely on the town hall and the provincial government throwing some money up. And I did actually have. You've heard of Red Bull, I guess. Obviously, well, the Red Bull, they sponsored us in the. It was a PwC or the Europeans back in the mid-90s. Do you know what they sponsored us with? Well, they turned up with a couple of cars and some girls in bikinis handing out Red Bull, and they lent us a tent. And I think we got 2 crates of Red Bull out of it. And I had to pay. I had to drive the tent back to Madrid. And it was
thank you very little Red Bull.
Wasn't big bucks, And then, for example, one of the reasons I stopped doing the PwC, we had some very successful PwCs here, and but after 1998, I've already mentioned the death in the Europeans. Now, the Europeans is very, a Category 1 competition is a very expensive event to run, and we ran it once again with money from the provincial government. But we knew how much it's going to cost. And the PwC costs a lot of money as well to run if you do it correctly with all the bells and whistles, all the hospitality stuff that you have to do. But after '98, in that event with the another tragic death, I wasn't so keen. But the town hall were pressuring me to run a PwC event. So I was in the PwC committee at this time. I think I started with the PwC committee in about '95. Because they wanted someone to give a bit of input. Because most of the committee, there's people like Harry Bunce, Hans Bollinger, and it was mainly pilots and they were looking, what pilots want, which is great. But of course, sometimes you need to. The guys who were putting their neck out to run the events with the organisers. They felt that they needed to get some input from there. So I was on the PwC. And I requested running another event, Piedrahita, although I didn't really want to. So we got PwC for 1999. And the town hall said, yeah, we'll back you up, And I said, this is going to cost a lot of money. We've got to pay the quota, PwC. Sure, no worries. We've got loads of people we can ask for sponsorship. Oh, great. Because, I'm completely rubbish, any form of, trying to get sponsorship. But you go ahead and knock yourself out. Great. Fantastic. And so we went ahead with PwC. We went ahead with getting everything going. The entry fees started coming in. And I think it's about a month before I went to the town hall, and unfortunately they'd had an election in the meantime, and some of the councillors had changed. And I said, hey, how are you getting on with all these sponsors? And he said, I think we're going to cancel. Because we can't. Yeah, we haven't found anyone. What? We're kind of a month or so away. The money was in. People had their flights booked. And we had to go ahead with them. We had the entry fee money. So I spoke to Xavier Murillo, and who was going to be my TD for that event, and Fred Escriba and Mandy, who were going to be the scorers. So that in those days, that was just a very small. Now things have changed in the PwC. Now they have their whole team, and the organisers are very little apart from putting up the shared infrastructure. But in those days, it was slightly different. But I would normally have to pay for their flights across. And I said, hey, Xavier, jump in your car, all come in one car. You're going to stay at my house, and we're going to cut costs. And of course, we had to cut costs. And you might think, well, wouldn't it be great if it rained for half the week and we could lose some traffic to some? And of course, it turned out to be, every single day was flyable and good. So all the expenses were there. But we ran the event, and it was a lot of hassle. we kind of broke even. Didn't lose money, but there was a lot of hassle, a lot of stress for not making any money, and with the potential to have lost a lot of money. So that was the end of it for me for running further PWs in PwC without, actually, and I actually had the written thing stamped, signed, and sealed from the town hall at that time. And so when we went for the Worlds, I made sure that the mayor of Piedrahita came with me to Austria with some of the councillors, and we did the presentation together, and it was all seen as them being the organisers, although really it's a local club. They were the front men, so they were going to get all the kudos, and they were going to pick up all the bills, of course, as well. And that way, I had them sort of trapped on that second time for the Worlds in 2011. But we've never had apart from those two crates of Red Bull. I shouldn't shortchange them. It was 2 crates, not 2 cans. And very, sexy girls with bikinis on the day. That was the sum total of our sponsorship. I guess
geez. Well, we were probably given. It's a tough sport, and I think Miguel could teach us all a lot about that side of it. He's obviously got it pretty figured out down in Mexico. Although with COVID, it's proving challenging for everybody, obviously. But okay, well, 2 things you said that I need to bring you back to. And you wrote this in your email to me as well. You had this accident that did your arm in. Did that lead to the illustrations, or were you an illustrator already?
No, I wasn't an illustrator already. I had a great interest in illustration and art, but as a child, younger person. But I got, since I was 18, a kid, I was just so motivated by flying and stuff, and that just kind of got in the way of everything else, really. And then suddenly, I lost interest in the competitions, and I had this sort of arm, my right arm, and I am right-handed, and it was just like it belonged to somebody else. I've got very little movement in it, and I thought I'm going to do some rehabilitation. So I started trying to draw. It was quite painful, and it was through that really, sort of early. And then it started to get better, and I found by having a board at the right angle, I could slide my arm across and draw by sliding the pen across the. I started going digital, which is even slightly out of the screen, and I started messing around with animation, which is something I wanted to do for years as well, and I think I put something up a little thing about the evolution of paragliding, hang gliding. And Ed from Cross Country Magazine saw it, and at that time he was looking to inject a bit of sort of illustration cartoons in the magazine, and he said, "Can I try to do some illustration?" And they had this idea of doing a piece about the huge range of personalities within the sport, within that range of the people within the sport, there are many stereotypes, and so there were little stories he'd write each month, and I was illustrating those stories for. I think we probably did a couple of years of those till it ran out of steam.
They were great, and now and again you illustrated for Kiwis, Gun for the Worlds. Those were really terrific.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that stuff, Kiwi. Although it was a struggle at the beginning with him because, he's a forceful sort of personality, and he was really fired up on the whole the competition thing, and I'd had met him back in the 90s, and he'd been out in Piedrahita, and I'd been seeing him over the years, and he's a very gregarious, sort of extroverted guy, but I'd never really seen him do much flying. He'd always be turning up. He turned up at the Worlds in Portugal, and he was covering that event. And of course, he did that. Wow. He talked about his first piece for XC magazine, the article he did for the Worlds in Granada back in, I think, the year 2000. I was at that event, and it was, I thought that was one of the best things I'd ever read. As far as that was the best ever review of a paragliding event. That was just fantastic. And of course, I met him later at other events, but he was never really flying. He was involved in his writing and stuff. when I met him, he was reporting as opposed to flying in the event. And then now here he is, 50, 53, and he's starting this competition thing. And of course, he sent me the story. And of course, I'm searching for to find some angle, a bit of humor. Because I'm not doing sort of direct reportage. I'm taking any little remark he might make and going off in a complete tangent with my own little story. Yeah? I'm not just going to be. And of course, I picked up on the whole psychedelic thing, and we had quite a tight deadline, and I was working. I probably did probably about 200 hours or something. So a huge amount of time in the space of these two weeks to get these out. And then he rang me up and he was really, "Hi, Chris, it's great, Steve. We're going to be like, Hunter Thompson, and you're going to be my illustrator." He was really fired up. And I said, "Yeah, great. I've done this stuff. I'll stick them across on the. I'll send them to you now." So I got home because I was out walking the dogs when he called me, and I sent them to him by email. And then I thought, he's going to love these, and nothing came back. And it was quiet, radio silence. And I thought, oh, hey, maybe he didn't like them. And then Ed rang me, I got an email from Ed saying, "I'm in the pub with Kiwi. He's mad. He's really pissed off." And of course, he didn't want the whole psychedelic thing to be brought in. And of course, in that first edition, there was tryptamine frogs on his head. And, it's just magic mushrooms here and there. It was just, and he wanted to be seen as a very serious person because he was going to be, he wanted to be selected for the paragliding team. He didn't want to be, I don't know, I presume that everybody knew about his, psychedelic, writing career, but he was trying to keep that very secretive, and it seemed. And anyway, luckily Ed sort of talked him down, and he ended up, really actually enjoying it, and he put it on. He kind of really got to like his little alter cartoon.
Oh, that really surprises me. Knowing Kiwi like I do, that surprises. I mean, I guess what it all comes down to isn't it? Is we all have egos, and especially as pilots, we're all pretty cowboy and independent and think we're the smartest thing ever, and then our idea is going to work. And so I guess he, still firmly falls in that, he has an ego, I guess, like we all do. So that's interesting though. I would have thought he would have kind of celebrated. I tried to get him going on that route a couple times in the podcast, and it just refused.
I guess. Yeah. Well, I guess he wanted
to. So interesting because it's such a big part of his life. I mean, a bigger part really.
Yeah, and I think in the end he really appreciated that, and he really enjoyed it. And then at the end, he was trying to feed me with ideas for cartoons, and he had this whole Ralph Steadman leaving Las Vegas style image, which we were going to do for the last one, which never. There were some fallouts with that particular series. He had some fallouts with some people in the New Zealand Federation. Some people didn't like some of the artwork, which I did, which I tried to explain actually was linked to my, I did, there was one particular picture, and because Kiwi was annoyed at one particular event because he was pushed off the podium by the meet director who was flying the event. And, I'm pretty against meet directors flying. I can't really see how you can do both those things. In fact, I did actually do that myself once, and well, here's another of my excellent stories. We back in 1994 on my first PWC, I was a pilot, loved flying, wanted to fly, but I was also the meet director, so I wasn't going to fly as a pilot and score, but I wanted to kind of be involved, And I had a TD, which was Xavier Raymond at the time, and we had this task, and it was a similar route to the previous year. I did this big flight, and in '93, and I got what was then the European record, which was quite big in those days. In those days it was easy to get records in Europe because anything over 100 was like big stuff. And I did about 160 Ks, and I ran along the edge of Cunin convergence line, which is jolly frightening, jolly stupid. But I survived it, and I did a big flight. And the year after at PwC, we had kind of similar conditions, and we had to cancel the task. But as I was trying to get down, my glider went to pieces on me, and I ended up with things spinning. The whole thing was all twisted up, and I was like spiraling down, no control, all twisted up. So I had to throw my reserve, and I threw my reserve, and luckily it opened. And then I started going up under the reserve because, of course, there was a Q&M above us. And then the glider sort of started flashing around. And the glider kind of started flying because it was heavily cravated. But that sort of unfolded itself. And then I downplaned, which was very, very convenient. And as I downplaned, I was actually very close to goal at this time. Being the meet director, I thought, well, I better say something because they're all down in goal watching me. And although it had been absolutely terrifying, I thought, well, the parachute's out, and I'm now actually descending, and I might actually survive this, so I better come across as a bit of a hero. I thought. So I was thinking, what would a Spitfire pilot say as he was just about to bail out? So I thought, right, I was going to say this, right? This is spot of trouble, but it seems to be okay now, coming down okay. That's what I was going to say, but I kind of got hold of my radio. Okay, by now I had the glider sort of gathered up, and I was coming down on the reserve. There were lightning bolts and things belting off to the east of us, but to the left it was sunny. But I was going down, which was convenient. And I was about to say these immortal words, and I realised my tongue was so dry and so expanded. I was, and then I hit the gas front because I got to lower, and then I went, oh, help! And so I didn't come across as very, very brave or very noble at all. And then I kind of hit the ground going extraordinarily fast, bounced a few times, and I went across. Luckily, we were in this sort of Castilian flatlands, and I was dragged across this field at a rate of knots. And then luckily there was a field, next field coming out, didn't have a fence, but it was a sunflower plant field, tall sunflowers. So that sort of broke the speed of my travel. And then shortly after, actually, jockey Sanderson sort of turned up because he was in goal, and he jumped in the car and rushed in, came, and he was the first on the scene. And yes, well, that was do you think I was a meet director and I was in the sky and I made it? Yeah, that was very embarrassing.
Landed in a reserve.
You can't do both jobs very effectively. And anyway, going back to Kiwi, and also, so we're talking about. I was trying to think of a pilot's reaction to meet directors. So we're talking about Kiwi was a little bit disgruntled with this particular meet director, and I was trying to think of, well, how can I portray what pilots think of a meet director? And I cast my mind back to that event in 2011, not the day of the accident, the day before, when all those pilots had a fantastic day, got to goal at 175 Ks, and then the meet director told them, sorry, but you've got a 0 for the day. Mm. And they didn't like me very much at all, really. At the briefing the next day, there was the odd word of, fascist bastard, and that sort of, comment. And so when I came to draw, what's often an embodiment of a meet director, I did a picture of a sort of jackbooted little fascist type, which had no resemblance. It wasn't a caricature of anyone in particular. It's just a caricature of a fascist dictator from the 1930s, dressed up in a sort of meet directing kit he had a map behind him, and I think in the background there was a shadow of 2 people he'd hung for airspace infringements. But anyway, that didn't go over very well with the particular meet director in New Zealand who had pushed Kiwi off the podium. And perhaps because of that drawing, and perhaps of Kiwi's belligerence at times, then a little thing kicked off with the Federation, and then Kiwi came. He got a little bit riled about that, really, and because of that, the magazine had to make an apology, and I think that kind of pretty much put a downer on the series.
Yeah, I remember
so I
that.
think although Kiwi Yeah, he did actually. He wrote the last ones, and of course, the whole series was called The Road to Macedonia. But by this time, the wheels of Macedonia had already gone, and Kiwi had spent quite some time. He was a bit late on getting the work out because he broke his arm in the meantime, or his wrist, so he couldn't ride. So things got a little bit heated, and it ended a little bit sadly, really. But I really enjoyed the whole thing, and it was great to be with him there. And of course, it's devastating to hear about his early demise there. And,
yeah, the weekend before, we were flying in Nevada together, and I'm very intimate with that whole story you just recollected, because I, of course, heard it. I heard an earful about it from him on his side. That was kind of ongoing
I'm sure
for a while.
Yeah.
But it was real interesting because I think in this last year, I'm pretty sure he did 11 or 12 comps. I mean, he just went from comp to comp to comp, and it really kind of over. I mean, he was actually losing interest a little bit in Burning Man. He's had gotten kind of corporate and big money, and in that thing that had kind of been a big chunk of his life for over 20 years. And so he was really putting a lot of effort and time into comps. And he made a crack when we were in Nevada that he came up and joined us mostly just out of boredom, and that, there were no comps. And he was like, God, it's just, I don't have, none of the psychedelic scene is happening right now, because you can't, be together in large groups. So none of that stuff's happening, and none of the comps are happening. And I just, I don't know what to do with myself. And he was laughing at himself, because he said, I'm surprised that the comp scene has become such a big part of my, free time and entertainment and what I'm pursuing. Is that I'm going to orient this towards a question. Was for you being a part of the comp scene, all those decades? I mean, it really was almost from the beginning in your hang gliding days and on through, looking back, would you have put more emphasis on something else? Would you have changed anything looking back?
If I've changed not crashing on numerous occasions, that's for sure. But you don't often get advance warning of that. But yeah, I used to I had a real habit of crashing hang gliders, but you seem to be able to crash those, and the wreckage tends to save you on the whole, although not always the case. But I don't know why. I'm not sure what I would have changed. I've never been particularly well for that. I wasn't really able to follow the whole competition thing to my design. I would have flown a lot more events than I did, but the financial constraints were just too much. I was able to go to many events by being a team in the 90s. Most of the events I went to, I was going there working as a technical delegate for the PwC, which is a role which Xavier Murillo then took on and really made his own during the 2000s. But of course, I have to work here in the summer, so the summer season was pretty much closed to me. So most of the comps I was doing is in Australia, and I would have liked to have done more, but it wasn't really a route for me to do so. It's the fly guiding I do. Of course, from from June to August is when our work season. And then the rest of the year it's no good at all here for cross country. So during the summer I couldn't really compete. So I don't know. It's who knows how we'd have changed things. Perhaps I should have got a proper job when I was younger and done that. But I do admire people who can do both. Can have a proper career and also do their paragliding, and then be able to put their flying aside in having a normal sort of family work life. And I was just never able to do that. I was so obsessed from an early age that, just went along this whole poverty-stricken, following the flying thing. So
yeah,
so there you go.
In your on your website, it said hang gliding ruined any serious career path, and you studied zoology and physiology, and then you got into hang gliding. Sounds like pretty soon, or we're at the kind of the same time you're coming out of school, and you obviously chose the career path of piloting. That was a while back, Steve. You and I are in the same department here when it comes to getting a little older in the tooth. But it's any regrets?
No. I mean, hang gliding was just so important to me. I had when I started, I had a sort of one of the pilots in our local club, a guy called Mark Haycraft, who was always my guru, who's now, I think he's won the French XC League many times over the last few years. Where he used to say, I remember us thinking, even if someone said, this is going to kill you within the next 5 years, it would have been difficult to stop. It was just such an obsession, such a buzz. And of course, I did give up. I did give up hang gliding because I don't fly hang gliders anymore, which is kind of curious. But of course, then paragliding took over. But yeah, it was just such such a demand on many people suffer this. You can't be happy. It is a drug. It's like crack cocaine or any of those other things. It creates a dependency. I think I'm over the worst of it now. I'm sort of in rehabilitation. I can actually, chill out on a on a good flying day and not worry too much about what I'm missing. But yeah, in the early, when I was younger, then it was hard to go to a normal job and think, Christ, it looks like a good day out there. I should, and I'm inside here, trying to earn some money. So when I finally got the opportunity to I was picked up by Airwave in about 91 to come out to Spain to set up their dealer network. And so for me, that was a blessing. I go, wow, I can finally do some work with what I really love. And of course, it didn't work out at all because it was it was a disaster. Airwave importation for me in Spain didn't work out. But then I soon moved into, I discovered Piedrahita, if you like, and saw the merits before anybody else did, because there was no one really flying here. There's no effective takeoff apart from just taking off from the actual side of the road. And by developing the competitions and doing the fly guiding, then it all started to work, and it was an income, and it worked, and it's got better, and it's been fine. So I've enjoyed that, and I'm still flying after all these years. And now I don't do the competitions, and that was a big buzz, but it was also a big disappointment, as I said before. But flying with groups of the people who come out to visit me, they come out. They're often the same people every year, so it's like flying every day with your mates going XC. So it's great. What could be better? It could have been better this year, but let's hopefully next year will be back to normal. But I think the whole industry is obviously suffering, and so it hasn't been. Luckily, here we were able to scrape through and get on most of the month of July and August. We were able to fly without restriction, and we had a reasonable number of pilots coming out here, so not so bad. And of course, now things are getting worse again, but it doesn't matter because it's bad weather for us. Well, I shouldn't say it doesn't matter. For the world, it matters, but for Steve Ham and our flying Piedrahita, it's no longer important for the next few months.
And is the chunk of the work there in Piedrahita for you tandems or instruction or both?
No, I do tandems, yeah, but that's a very minor part. We're mainly working with sort of intermediate to advanced pilots, usually sort of B class, C class guys. People are flying XC already, and they just come here for a holiday, and they want to go XC. So I'm solving that problem for them. All the infrastructure, accommodation, flying with them. And I kind of treat each day as I would perhaps if it were a competition. We do a very detailed meteo brief and talk through the potential flight we're going to do, iron out all the possible problems. So then we're actually flying. We don't have to be, I'm not radio controlling people at any stage. We're just making strategic decisions or comments about the weather around us and what's happening and how we might adapt. But none of this, turn left, turn right. It's like flying with your mates and that usual interaction which you have.
Can you elaborate on maybe, one or the two? Because you talked about the accident with your arm. I not to delve into the darker side too much in this talk, but I think we can often learn from accidents. Sounds like you've had a few. What are, what what was the cause? What were the takeaways? How could you help people not have the same thing happen to them?
Ooh. Well, I mean, as I said, with hang gliding, I was going through aluminium like it was going out of fashion in the early days because I was just young, keen, and the consequences weren't that bad on the whole when I crashed the thing. So I had a very, and I think when you're younger, you haven't got this preoccupation with, crikey, this might kill me. You're able to learn more effectively. So your learning curve when you're reasonably brave and not so worried about the consequences are very good. So I think I got hang gliding. I got pretty good, pretty quick with hang gliding because I was a bit blasé to the
Sure.
to the problems. Yeah, I remember I landed up. Yeah, I actually had some very near misses out. I guess you've heard of Bill Moyes, the Australian famous guy. Well, he was very kind. We went out for my first big hang gliding comp. We went out to go to the Forbes event, which was a towing event, and we went on to see Bill, this like god of hang gliding. And he kind of likes poms, and he kind of took us under his wing, and he took us up to his holiday home in somewhere north of Sydney, in Newcastle, and we went towing with him. Now, his towing was quite a precarious thing, in my opinion. It was very exciting. Basically, he'd tie a long line, like a washing line, to a speedboat, and then you coil up all this line, this rope on the edge of the beach. You clip onto the hang glider, and he had some sort of, it's like a motorcycle throttle cable going up to a clip on the nose, and then you sort of lift your leg. He'd go herring off on the speedboat, and then when the line goes, there's no more line, then bing, you're off, and you sort of climb out, and you'd be flying out to sea, and of course there's no radio, and I think when you get high, that's it. You sort of wiggle your legs around, and that means building about release. And we had this circumstance where we were very high, going out to sea. This fantastic, the dolphins in the bay. It was beautiful, and I got that Bill Moyes down there telling me it's amazing. And I pulled the clip to get rid of the line, and it just jammed. The line was attached to the hang glider, and I had a kilometre or so of line out, going out to sea, no radio, no idea what to do, and I sort of wiggled my legs a lot, and I think Bill kind of realised what happened. And of course, what are we going to do? Because of course I can't detach the line. If I was to get lower, the line would go into the water, and I'd dart into the water. And luckily, there was like a sandbank further out, and he kind of throttled back, and we just lowered with the taut line. I landed with the line on this sandbank, and
God.
That wasn't an accident. That could have been a fatality. And there's a friend of mine, Chris Jones, in the boat, and Bill, being an Aussie bloke, he wouldn't let Chris fly, and because Chris was a vegetarian, he had long hair. So Bill, being an Aussie bloke, said, "No, you can't fly, mate. Pommy puff." And but Chris said that Bill did get a little bit he got a little bit concerned that he might be kidding me that day. But the next day, Bill, I did have an accident, but a minor one. We're on the beach, and Bill goes herring off on the speedboat, and the line's whipping away, and there's a bit of a longshore drift, so it's taking the line off one way, and then there's the winds coming off to the right, and the speedboat's going straight on. And I'm thinking, well, which way do I point the hang glider in? Do I point it at the line? Do I point it at the wind? Do I point it at the boat? And I'm thinking this really quick because the line's now whipping away. And I took a vector of the three, and my maths was off. Anyway, well, Bill mentioned to Chris in the boat, said, well, you watch what happens now, knowing that I'm about to take a cropper. I can have an accident. And of course, I was facing the wrong way. Both uprights broke, and I was dragged across the beach because of the inertia of the boat pulling the line. And we totaled the glider for the day. But Bill just wanted to show me that, he likes, the school of hard knocks, I guess. And he came back and said, what did you do wrong? And I said, well, I don't know. What did I do wrong? He said, you've got to point at the line. So that's what you need to do, point at the line. So I learned that, and I'll never forget that. But I've never been on another speedboat ride like that. So that was mildly uncomfortable around my nether parts that day. And then I did have a proper, good, real hang gliding accident because I was still thinking, I'm good at crashing. I'll carry on crashing. And then at the Spanish Nationals back in 1991, when I just started working at Railways, we were at the second phase of the Nationals in Castellón de Sos, which is it's sort of like an alpine environment in the north of Spain in the Pyrenees. And it's a great place. It's a fantastic place for paragliding. But it's not so good for hang gliding because there's nowhere to land. It's very, very tricky for landing. And it was a little bit like that competition which Kiwa mentioned in Granada. There's a huge amount of people having crashes. And then my turn came. And my crash, I was actually these were the days when we didn't have GPSs. Now you have to put a pin in the map when you land. And I was actually just on the wrong side of the mountain from goal. I just had to get over this mountain, I'm in goal. And I thought, if I fly down the valley, it'll be further away from the goal. So I'll just land on top of the mountain. And it wasn't right on the top of the mountain. There was a village, a little bit further down, up on the mountain. And I thought, I'll do one of these fly-on-the-wall landings. And a fly-on-the-wall landing is where you kind of fly at the mountain and you kind of, it's terrifying. And then you sort of fly up and then flare. And I didn't do it very well. And I crashed. I was concussed, smashed on myself, good and proper, because I would have I hit this dry stone wall at 40, 50 k's an hour or whatever it was. And so I was concussed, put a big hole through my cheek, through to my teeth, huge facial lacerations, all the skin ripped off my neck, my ear was hanging off, I had a laceration in my eye, and I was unconscious, broken arm, ribs, knee, and possible broken neck. And of course, there's no radios and nothing. And I came round, I thought, oh, cripes. Not so good, and I was wearing those Lycra aero sleeves that one wears, and so I used those to sort of bandage up my face, to hold my face together, so my cheek wasn't flapping around. And I knew there was a village a bit further down, so I started walking. I got to this village, it was all sealing up, and I knocked at the door. A little girl answered, nearly fainted. Anyway, they brought me in, looking after me. By this time, the village priest turned up, and he started. I thought he was giving me the last rites. He was in Latin, in fact. In retrospect, I think it was Catalan he was speaking. And anyway, that was a pretty shit accident. And I ended up being taken to a hospital, a local little clinic, and they were. And I remember they sewed up my face. Had about 30 stitches in my face, no anaesthetic, and then they put a cast on my arm without setting the bone. And then the next day when they came around to check me, I remember they did some x-rays and he was holding my head. He was rotating my head and he said, "We're not quite sure if you've got a broken neck or not." And whilst rotating my head, which was really concerning. And but that was pretty much the end of hang gliding for me for a while, because I couldn't carry the thing. So that's when I really started getting into the paragliding side of things, because it was paragliders weren't very good at that stage, but it was easier to carry up a hill and into rig, and it wasn't so tough on the. And also, I began to get a little bit nervous about landing hang gliders after that. So I think for me, being like I'm a superhuman and I'm going to be okay, whatever happens. And I thought, hey, shit, that's a big wake up call. And I was then, from that day on, a lot more cautious, and probably my learning curve went down on hang gliding. But then I started paragliding. And then initially paragliding, of course, is terrifying because the thing collapses all the time, which hang gliders didn't tend to do. And but we soon found out that that was okay, sort of. And of course, I had many things, near misses. I had one, classic one where we were at PwC in Cornet Solo. Once again, I wasn't flying in the competition; I was the TD, but I was flying the course, and we had a very, very good meteorologist, or so we thought. And he said, "Oh, no problems today with storms. They're all going to be staying in Switzerland. No problems. You may see some big congestions, but absolutely no problem whatsoever." And I was just, after flying a bit the course, cutting corners, I was hovering over goal, looking at this huge sort of congested cloud just hot over the last turn point. I went down I radioed down saying, "Don't you think that's a little bit big?" And then at a moment, like lightning broke and all hell broke loose. Now we had the whole competition in the air, everyone trying to get down. Of course, the gust front came through and everything was getting hoovered up. And I was just with my back to the village, full bar, so I wouldn't get blown into it. And then the whole line just went to pieces. And it went completely behind me, and I was falling out of the sky from about 100 meters. And then it wasn't going to recover, but by pure luck, the glider went one side of the cable. It was a telephone cable, and I went the other side of it. So it kind of bungeed me down onto the ground quite safely.
Oh
From
my
having
God.
no glider, I just swung down under these cables, and actually, I did take the tip of my glove off because I kind of flashed past the concrete post, and it broke my fingernail. So that was it, broken fingernail, which wasn't bad really.
Steve, where was
and
that?
It was curiously, that was in Cornizzolo in Italy.
Was that the one that Belcourt threw
his?
This sounds really familiar. Was that the one that Belcourt threw his reserve and then got pasted on the fence?
May want to be lots of people. My wife, she was spiraling. My wife, she was spiraling down, trying to get down, and she ended up in the lake and had to swim ashore, as did Jill Hartley, another Scottish woman. Loads of people were slapping into the ground. Luckily, there's a lot of boggy ground around the lakes there. And it was 9. People would have thought it may have been Bill did that. Yeah,
I think it was, because it sounds exactly like that. He was real low, and just getting smacked all over the place in the gust front, and and then through, and then his reserve was on one side of the fence, and it was blowing so hard, but he was on the other side of the fence. So you imagine like a chain link fence, so it just basically sucked him up into the fence. It was blowing so hard that it ended up just breaking the fence over. He was just kind of pasted against this thing, and I guess there were some Italians out on their porch looking on with interest, and it's quite a funny story.
No, it was carnage. It was remarkable that nobody was seriously hurt. Well, nobody was hurt. Everyone got down. So many people had big stories to tell, and but no one was hurt. And I lost half the lines on my glider, but hey, that was nothing compared to what could have happened. And of course, then 2011, I had my big accident. My proper accident, which really hurt me. But up until then, the usual sprained ankles and things like that. But paragliding had been reasonably nice to me. But there you go. What can you say to people? You're not invincible. Take it easy and don't fly something within your capabilities.
Yeah,
which I am doing now.
We haven't. It's all still. There's. I mean, and I was on the rescue, but they haven't really released the full details of QE, because they're still trying to figure out exactly what happened. So I won't go there at all. But the real takeaway for me, and this actually came from Josh Cohn, and he's always very thoughtful about these kind of things. But it was just a very good reminder of the fact that we and our gear have limits, and we need to be aware of them. And not, we don't know yet the gear side of Kiwis, but it's, what I do know is that, he was he'd been a little bit tired. He was kind of tired down in Texas. He was tired the weekend before I saw him in Nevada. It's a huge air place and very remote, but very much like the Sierras, the listeners that have flown out in the Owens, it's kind of like that. And, so you just have to be mindful of every day where you are, and I think with Kiwi, he definitely wasn't as robustly, energetic as I've seen him in the past. I think he was definitely, he'd just gotten his book published, and, there's probably just a lot of things going on in his life where, maybe sometimes it's okay for flying to be a distraction, but not always.
Yeah. He was, was it 55? I think you've got to appreciate as you get, your reflexes are no longer what they were as you get older. And, I certainly, I know, I plateaued years ago, and I think I'm going down in skills, really. And I certainly know that I'm certainly not as brave as I was. And for that reason, I'm not prepared to try and fly things which are beyond my capability. I try my hardest to keep out of situations which might stretch me. And but of course, every now and again, the thing with paragliding is that you do end up in those circumstances. The weather can change, or you might get low in a place you didn't expect to be low, where the landings aren't so good. So we're often presented with circumstances which might be just beyond our limits. And sometimes luck's in our favor, but often it's not. And what you need to do is to put things, stack the odds in your favor by flying, with the right equipment, getting the right skill sets, doing SIVs, doing all those things that you need to do, which can be a little bit irksome, time constraints and finance. But it is an extraordinarily dangerous sport that we do. It's very fulfilling, very enjoyable, but it's you've got to be. It's the consequences of making just a humdrum mistake, and when you're having a bad day, can be long-lasting and very, very painful or fatal.
Mm. That's a great place to end, I think, Steve. It's some very good advice there at the end. But thank you for sharing all that. You were kind of rolling on some stories there. I think we need to tap back into some more of those at some point. Those are terrific. But thanks for sharing the 2011 comp. I don't know that everybody's heard the full story there, so it was great. It was great to hear that, and thank you for sharing your life of flight with us. It's been many, many decades here, and I hope there's many more to come.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Cool. I just noticed we're at 90 minutes in, so I wanted to, but that was a really good spot to end, although we don't need to end. If you have anything else to add or throw in that you want to, let's do it now and we'll slide it in. I just thought I wanted to end on that one because that was some really good. That was a great natural end.
I think we've covered. We've covered a lot. We've been, I think, an hour and a half or so. We've been at it. I think. So yeah, that's fine by me. Yeah.
Cool. How did you break your arm? How did that accident go? What happened?
It was so. It was. I live a few k's from the village in a little log house, and I've got a few nearby landing fields, which are quite tight, but they're okay. And it was a day when all the gliders, my clients had landed, and it was becoming stormy. And I thought, well, rather than land in my own house and go have a coffee, see the dogs, and I just set up to go into this field I'd flown into hundreds of times. And of course, because of the storms, which were just, the winds are a little bit squirrely, and it was a different approach than normal. And I just tried to lose a bit of height by doing a steep turn. I was flying a Mantra 4, I think it was at the time, and I just tip-stalled it. So I had to recover and let the thing dive a bit. By then, I kind of dived into an area which is, my house is sort of out in the boonies, but there's some other houses nearby, and I was sort of flying over someone's house with cables and things, and I got near the road, and I was sort of boxed in by cables. So I had to sort of, rather than hit the cable, maybe at neck height, or hit it, I just had to forestall the glider, over the road at about 10 meters or something like that. Oh. So I just forestalled it down onto concrete, which was, I had to hold it up, so it wouldn't spin. I had my hands down as I went in heavily, and my body collapsed, and I could have had my hands down to stop it spinning or anything. All the force went through my right arm, and it just shattered it. It was an open fracture, and I lost the elbow. I lost the interosseal membrane, which is the membrane which goes between the cubital and the radius, and that never heals. So I've lost the rotation in the arm there. And that's the same arm I crashed on the hang glider back in the day, and also I had 2 other accidents on skateboards when I was a kid. And so that arm had been just taking the pounding over the years. and I took some tendons out on the shoulder. So yeah, it was all focused on the arm, but it was a really bad injury, and so and it sectioned lots of nerves. So I had lots of parasympathetic pain, which only went away. That went away a couple of years ago, and it's still shit. But it was just one of those accidents, an embarrassing accident. It was nothing heroic about it. It was one of those ones which you wouldn't. It was like I always think I'd hate to die coastal soaring. That would be embarrassing. It's like one of those accidents where, Christ, trying to land on a reasonably okay day near your house, cock it up because tips toward the glider. And but yeah, it was a hard one, and it was kind of on top of all that emotional shit that I had from the Worlds, and it wasn't in a good place for quite a few years really. But luckily, I was still able to fly. The next season, it was painful. At least flying, I was able to fly and able to still work, and so it could have been worse. But
does your wife still fly?
I thought at the time. She does, but not very much. No, she was a Spanish champion about '98, I think it was. But she had a cancer diagnosis about 3-4 years ago, so that was a big setback for her. And of course, also we've got kids who are in their teens, and of course, once the kids came through, then she was pretty much stopped. She started again. She's done a few flights this year, just evening stuff, very gentle. But she hasn't got the fire, and she used to be really keen, but she's managed to keep the habit. And I say she's got off the. I'm still, unfortunately, I'm still a little bit hooked up on the drug, but not so much as I was. Yeah. But obviously, you are as well with all your. Well, you've got a different sort of. You're very much an extreme. Are you going to be doing? Is there going to be an X Alps next year?
Yeah.
You're going to try for that.
I've signed up for one more. I really didn't think I was going to after the last race. The 2015 and the 2017. I mean, I was already thinking about the next one during the race. It was just like, God, this is just so fun. This is so outrageous, and I love my team. And it was real obvious. And after 2019. It wasn't nearly as obvious. Partly, it was a number of things. I didn't like all the waypoints. I thought that was kind of ridiculous. We basically all just kind of followed each other around. It wasn't, you just couldn't make moves like you could earlier. And then the other just big reality was, obviously I'm not getting any younger, but it's the pace is just getting outrageous. And, it was real obvious to me that it wouldn't matter how much I trained. I just, I'm always pretty fast on the ground, especially for the way I'm built. Like, I'm not built like a Gushelbauer. I'm not tall and lanky and like a marathon runner. I'm kind of like a wombat, and and I'm older and I've got terrible knees, but I can maintain very good speed. But let me get to the point. The point was, like, in 2019, I basically had the best race I've ever had in terms of just everything, the team and the strategy and the training and the physical prep. And we just, we'd kind of figured it out, and yet it was still just kind of middle of the pack. I placed 12th, and back in 2015, it was 8th. And that, I guess that gave me this like false hope that, if I work really hard at this, I could, so anyway, I got wrapped up in the numbers rather than just the awesomeness of it, because it is just awesome. But the reality was just like, God, these younger guys are just getting better, and everything's getting faster, and it's becoming less and less adventure and more just crazy pace. And so anyway, I wasn't as excited coming out of this one to do it again. But then, of course, you have a year thinking about it and pondering it and talking to your team, and because my team, they're really excited to do it again. It is just really fun. So I'm trying to figure out how to separate more from like attainment and more just the process. And so in a sense, I have quite different goals going into this one, which may end up being quite freeing and allow me to do even better in the end. But I'm trying not to have that. It's one thing to say, well, I don't care about the results, but I'm trying to have that not be nearly as important, I guess, is what I'm saying. So, I'll still train really hard, and I think we'll still have a lot of fun. I honestly, I don't know that we're going to get to go do it. I think they'll have the race, but I'm not. I'm not very confident Americans are going to be able to even travel over there by then. But we'll see. Hopefully.
Yeah.
But
it's a shame. It's just such a remarkable thing. For me, it's a shame. It's like one of the ultimate sporting events which you can do. I think, but it hasn't got the media interest, has it? Really? No, just like many things, paragliding on the whole, people don't appreciate it. That is such a fantastic adventure. This whole XLs thing, and they are doing a lot better as far as sponsorship than most events, but sure. It's if you compare it to like motor car racing, which is so tedious, and it's got all that exposure, and then you've got this real adventure, with like the complexities, tactics, spectacle, and nobody's interested,
Yeah, and risk and all these things. I mean, when you think about just like ultrathons, I always describe it to people like, well, think ultrathon every day, but for 12 days, but you're carrying your pack and you're flying a ton in often really dicey conditions, but they still don't really get it. I mean, that's the thing. It's not relatable. It's not golf, people can't relate to it, I guess. So they don't, it's just, but it is, I can't even remember what your question was. Oh, I mean, I'm definitely, so I have a little girl, she's 3, and I am definitely, I'm a little concerned actually going into this one because I'm noticing that there's just physical things like my vision is not, what it was even 2 years ago. My vision's going, I'll be 49 in this next one. And you do start to have a much different approach to risk. And, I think that will, hopefully that will kind of evaporate during the race. Cause you get in these weird mind where you become very strong in your mind during the race, and you've trained for it, and you just start really believing in yourself, and you fly in conditions that I think typically would be pretty nerve-wracking, and you just got it. And I'm not even saying, I don't even think they're more dangerous. It's just because you really are in the right headspace for it. But like your story of doing the fly on the wall landing, you just get in this headspace where you're not going to screw it up. And, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, but it is wicked dangerous. And so I don't know that maybe I'd be in the same headspace of it without my daughter. I'd still be struggling with that just because that's what happens when you get older. But certainly having my daughter is spotlighted it more for me. I don't really want to come home now these days. And I think, that does, it's not something, like you said, it's not something you're thinking about when you're 20.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's, it's a lot of risk that exit, because that's, we didn't speak about it in the talk, but as a competition pilot, or as a meet director, you've got to understand that people's acceptance of risk, or the way they fly, changes dramatically when they're put in a competition environment. They'd start taking these insane risks, which they would not normally take, and of course, and for what reason? Because there's no big prize money, there's only kudos, and at the end of the day, that kudos doesn't go very far because. We often ask this question: who knows who the world champion is at the moment? Or you ask that to competition pilots at an event, and there's a lot of head scratching, and so you say, Christ, why do they think that it's worth taking a risk? Because they're not going to be remembered. In fact, they might be remembered for a few weeks if they kill themselves during the event. But taking a risk to win these competitions is not worth it. But people do, and it's just the way that humans are made. You put them in a competition environment, and then people push themselves a little bit more than they should normally. Really, that's can be a problem. So
that's a good one. It would have been a good one to talk about that. Although we are now, I'm still recording, so we can maybe throw that in.
Well,
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's a real we've all heard that a bunch of times. Like, hey, there's not even glory, let alone money. Literally, like you said,
yeah,
most people in the sport have no idea who won the worlds last year, and uh,
yeah.
and no one cares. And so you have this real problem with ego, because it does really happen. In the X
Mm,
Alps, it happens all the time, and that's, I think, a different driver for sure. A lot of that's
mm.
just the lack of wanting to walk more, and I mean it's there's a lot of things that
Yeah.
really do make you do silly stuff over and over again. But like I said, I mean, and I'm toying with saying something really stupid and dangerous here, but there haven't been there've been a lot of accidents in the X Alps, but there hasn't been the ultimate accident there. And I think that's just because you do, like I said, you do train a lot for it. So the people are naturally resilient, they're able to bounce better. But you just get in this funny frame of mind that I very often can't get in when I'm just normally flying. And I think when we go to competitions, we're offloading even more responsibility. We're not even paying attention to the weather. I think we're often really then flying on ego and desire for
Mm.
a podium or something that is really not why we should be doing it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of herd instinct as well, isn't there? Where people are flying, you have to be very, very careful with task design, because I think anyone who's flown a few comps will realise that at some stage, most people have stories with, oh my god, we had to fly into this turn point, which was in this valley in the rotor, and we were risking our lives to complete the course, and they didn't cancel the task, so we had to do this. And you often hear these stories,
Oh yeah.
especially in the early days when they had to have, when there's no GPSs and they had to use a building or something, and you're sending people into quite conflicting spaces. And and that does happen. So you have to be really careful as a meet director or as anyone on the task committee to make sure that you've designed a task which isn't going to be in any way problematic. And then you've got to realise that if it is problematic, these guys on the whole they're not thinking rationally and they're going to do it anyway.
Right.
And
Right.
there's many cases where you're flying on, you're thinking, I've done it in a competition. I remember flying in with Mark Watts at this event where we did have a fatality. It was it was a really windy day when the Mistral was blowing in France at Saint Andre, but we went to Saint Vincent, which is a place where you can fly just about in the little magic bubble of air,
Yeah,
which is not so windy.
Yeah.
But they set the task further down the Dormius range out of the magic bubble. And I was flying along, reasonably up at the front with Mark Watts, and I thought, okay, well, that doesn't matter. When we get to the end of this valley, we're not going to be stupid enough to carry on into the real mountains. We're just going to land there. We're all at the same point. And then we got there, and Mark went in. And I thought, oh shit, okay, well, all go in, and we ended up, having to land, in an unpleasant place further than the mountains, because coming back into the howling wind was impossible. And one person who tried it was killed. And it was just shit task, very, very bad task setting. And of course, if we'd have had a normal, sensible, if we'd have rationalized it a little bit better, we'd have just landed in a nice, safe, easy place.
Yeah.
It was nobody got any points. Somebody died, and it was then fantastic. Maybe in the Excel, because you're not constrained by too many turn points, and you are flying more on your own, and you have to sort of you have to make a lot more decisions on your own rather than just following the herd. Then perhaps it is safer.
Yeah, I think
as a
so.
competition format.
Yeah, and you have this. You do have more of a longevity approach to it all. It's all you're never thinking about Monaco during the race. You're just thinking about the next move, the next move, the next move. And I think it is about you recognize if you wreck yourself or even just roll an ankle, your race is over. So I think there is
Yeah.
there is a bit more of a preservation side of it, but then there's also just, we were laughing the other day telling stories about it. There's just so many times where you do things that, I can still stand by them, now going, I really have felt like I haven't done anything that risky during the race. But if you were an outsider looking at some of the things I've done, you'd go, or what are you, you're crazy then. If you're telling yourself a complete lie. But like I said, you just get in this frame of mind where, launching cross and 40K an hour is totally reasonable. You've trained for it. You've got that move, but it's not really that reasonable. You know what I mean? And the other one is just how many times I've flown down a canyon that had nowhere to land, just in my mind. Well, it's the X-Ops. I have to keep going. There will be a place to land. There always has been. And one time there wasn't. I landed in the trees and balled up my wing and packed it and kept going. And it didn't even slow me down. It was, whereas usually that'd be kind of a high, it'd be a high adrenaline event, just landing in the trees. It's just funny. You'd get in a very, very cool. I think that's the addiction part of it. I mean, I think a bigger part of the addiction is, like you said, it is a drug, and it's a very, very intense drug for 12 days. You're basically in flow for 12 days straight, and there's not that many ways to get there. And so I think that's why we're all addicted to flying, is we like that flow channel state. And the X-Alps is like it's a springboard into that state and then you just get to stay there the whole time.
And going on to that, risk taking, there's a perfect example that World Championships in Sierra Nevada in Granada in the year 2000, where Kiwi did the article on. I think it was one of the last days. We had an awful forecast. I think it was blowing around 70, 80 k's an hour, just 500 meters above the tops. And we were up on the sea station, and it was just awfully windy. And the cast was going to be cancelled. But the Spanish, they thought they'd have a bit of fun. Because so they went ahead and said, and they started doing the briefing, right? And saying, okay, these are the conditions. We just want you all to stay, just try and stay low today. It shouldn't be too turbulent, of course. And we don't want you to go to the valleys because it's blowing 100 kilometers an hour in the valleys. And they did just a straight-faced task briefing. And of course, there were some people going, these Spanish guys are crazy, they're trying to kill us. But they were taking their notes. And then I think one of the Swiss guys got up, this is disgusting, you can't do this. But the Spanish guy, the media director, it was a joke, but they just carried on through it, said, you'll be okay, And people were getting really angry, really uptight. And of course they should be, because, it was launchable at the launch there because we're in the lee, but it was howling gale just above. But, those people, it was a joke. And everyone thought, well, we might die doing this, but that was the task. And then guys started getting their gear ready, right? And of course, then they said, no, we're only joking. Because very funny. But that was an illustration of the fact that they think
people will do it.
This is extraordinarily dangerous. This is beyond anyone's capabilities. But okay, well, if other people do it, I better get ready as well. And crazy.
I hadn't heard that one. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, this is a real honor, man. We'll have to do this in person someday soon. I'd love to fly with you when all this COVID is behind us. We put this awful year in our rearview mirror and go flying together. But thank you for your terrific illustrations, and thank you for giving so much to this sport over the last 30-something years. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
No worries. Well, hopefully you're recovering very quickly from your COVID experience, and I wish you well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's not been a big deal, so we'll get through it. Cheers, bud. Talk to you soon.
Okay. All right. Bye.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind-the-scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account, and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.